The war had taken everything from them: time, certainty, and the illusion of safety. The stars above Wax remained unchanged, but the planet beneath them was scarred, its once flourishing cities now standing as testaments to survival rather than prosperity. Where once there had been harmony, now there was a quiet, uneasy anticipation, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Alpha stood at the edge of the grand strategy chamber, staring through the translucent walls that overlooked the capital. The golden glow of Wax's energy cores pulsed beneath the ruined skyline, their light flickering in places where the planet's wounds had yet to heal. He traced the fractures in the shield dome, reminders of how close they had come to destruction. Behind him, the chamber doors slid open with a whisper of displaced air. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. He could sense her presence, the faint hum of her energy, the quiet yet steady rhythm of her steps. Lyra. She approached without a word, standing beside him as she, too, took in the sight of their battered home. For a long time, neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say about the war, not in the way soldiers spoke of battles and tactics. What lingered between them was something deeper, something more fragile than the energy structures that held Wax together. At last, Lyra broke the silence. They want to negotiate. Alpha didn't react immediately. He exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening behind his back. The Trions don't negotiate. They manipulate. Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. Then what do we do? Continue fighting until there's nothing left? We both know that can't be the answer. Alpha finally met her gaze, searching for something in her eyes: hope, doubt, defiance. He saw all three. They know they can't win a prolonged war against us, she continued. Not anymore. We've adapted, we've fought back. But they also know we can't keep this up forever. If we don't at least listen to them. Listen to what? Alpha cut in, his voice sharp but not unkind. To empty words. To another trap. He turned away, his gaze returning to the city. Every time we've given them an opening, they've taken it as an opportunity to strike. Every ceasefire has been a lie. Every retreat has been a feint. Lyra didn't look away from him. Then what do you suggest? That we refuse and wait for their next attack. If we refuse, at least we remain in control of our fate, he said. If we trust them, even for a moment, we give them a weapon against us. She sighed, her arms crossing over her chest. I don't want to trust them, Alpha. I'm not naive. But I also don't want to see any more of our people die. There's a chance, just a chance, that we can end this before it gets worse. Alpha's jaw tightened. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that there was still room for reason in a war that had already cost them so much. But in his heart, he knew the Trions. He had seen their cruelty firsthand, had studied their tactics, had watched them destroy entire cities with no hesitation. They don't seek peace, he said at last, his voice quiet but firm. They seek advantage. And if we give it to them, they will use it. Lyra took a step closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. Then we go in prepared, she said. We listen, but we do not believe. We give them nothing. But if there's even the smallest chance to stop this war without more bloodshed, we have to try. You know that. Alpha held her gaze, and for a moment, the war faded. It was just the two of them, standing on the precipice of a decision neither of them wanted to make. I will listen, he said finally. But I will not trust them. The tension in Lyra's shoulders eased, but she didn't smile. She knew, just as he did, that this wasn't a victory. This was a gamble. And if the Trions had taught them anything, it was that they never played fair. The Trion warship hovered above the designated meeting point, a massive silhouette against the darkened sky. It was a beast of metal and raw power, its hull lined with scars from previous battles. The Wax delegation approached in a sleek energy-crafted vessel, its design almost fragile in comparison. Alpha sat at the front, his expression unreadable, while Lyra monitored the readings from the control panel beside him. As they neared, a transmission cut through the static. Proceed to the docking bay. Any deviation will be considered an act of hostility. Alpha didn't respond. He simply guided the ship forward, watching as the Trion vessel swallowed them into its docking chamber. The landing was smooth, but the tension in the air was anything but. The moment the hatch opened, armed Trion soldiers surrounded them, their weapons raised in silent warning. Their armor, black and red, gleamed under the harsh artificial lights. At their center stood General Kraylon, his reptilian eyes cold and calculating. "You came," Kraylon said. "Unexpected." Alpha stepped forward, ignoring the weapons aimed at him. "You wanted to talk. So talk." Kraylon's mouth curled into something that might have been amusement. He gestured toward a corridor. "Walk with me." Lyra shot Alpha a glance, but he had already made up his mind. With measured steps, they followed Kraylon deeper into the warship. The halls were cold, lined with dark metal and faintly pulsing lights. Every turn was monitored by Trion guards, their fingers hovering over their weapons. Kraylon led them into a war chamber, a circular room with a massive display of the battlefield. The holograms flickered, showing Wax's cities, defenses, and weak points. Lyra tensed. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a demonstration of power. "We both know how this war will end," Kraylon said, turning toward Alpha. "Your people are persistent, but persistence is not victory. You are delaying the inevitable." Alpha's eyes locked onto the display. "I see no terms. Only threats." Kraylon's expression didn't change. "Terms require leverage. We already have it." Lyra's hand twitched at her side. Something was wrong. Then she saw it, the faint energy fluctuations in the holograms, the slight distortion in the planetary readings. A second too late, she realized what it meant. An alarm blared. The room shook. A voice cut through the comms. "Trion fleet has breached Wax's outer defenses. They're attacking." Kraylon's smile was razor-sharp. "Negotiations are over." Alpha moved before he could think. A surge of energy erupted from his palm, striking the closest Trion guard and sending him crashing into the wall. Lyra ducked as plasma fire lit up the chamber, drawing a compact energy blade from her belt. Kraylon stepped back, unfazed. "Kill them." Alpha grabbed Lyra's wrist. "We need to move. Now." They didn't wait for an opening, they made one. Alpha hurled an energy pulse at the chamber's center, sending the table and holograms crashing into the floor. Smoke filled the air. Using the chaos, they bolted for the exit, dodging incoming fire as Trion soldiers swarmed after them. The war had never been about peace. It had always been a trap. And now, Wax was under siege. The corridors pulsed with red emergency lights as alarms howled through the Trion warship. Alpha and Lyra moved fast, their footsteps echoing against the metallic floors. Behind them, Trion soldiers shouted commands, boots pounding in pursuit. Plasma fire scorched the walls, missing them by inches. They veered left, deeper into the vessel. Alpha raised a hand, releasing a controlled burst of energy that sent a row of crates tumbling into the path of their pursuers. It wouldn't stop them for long. Lyra's voice was sharp. "We need an exit." "We're too far from the docking bay," Alpha said, scanning the hull for another way out. His eyes landed on a reinforced bulkhead door ahead. "That leads to the lower levels." They sprinted toward it. Lyra placed a hand on the control panel, channeling a pulse of energy through the circuits. Sparks flew, and the door hissed open just as plasma fire ripped through the space where they had been standing. They darted through, sealing it behind them. The lower level was darker, lit only by thin strips of flickering light. The air was thick with the scent of metal and fuel. Machinery hummed all around them, massive pipes stretching along the walls, pumping energy through the ship's core. Lyra's voice was tight. "This looks like a maintenance sector." "It'll have an escape hatch," Alpha said. "If we reach the outer hull, we can force our way out." A distant explosion rumbled through the structure. The ship trembled. Lyra pressed a hand to the wall, eyes narrowing. "Something's wrong. That wasn't from us." Alpha's communicator crackled to life. A wax operative's voice broke through the static. "Alpha, do you copy? We're here." Trion forces launched a full-scale assault. They bypassed the planetary shield with a coordinated strike. "The city is under siege." Alpha's hands clenched. He could already picture it, Wax's luminous spires shattered under the weight of Trion weapons, their people scrambling to defend what they had built. Lyra's voice was urgent. "Tell me our defenses are holding." A pause. "For now." But the Trions sent ground forces. They had this planned from the start. Alpha exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay focused. "We're getting off this ship. Hold the line." Lyra turned toward him. "We need to move." They pushed forward, winding through the narrow maintenance tunnels. The ship groaned as another explosion rocked it from the inside. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the entire structure seemed to lurch. Lyra's eyes darted to Alpha. That wasn't an attack. That came from within. Alpha's mind raced. They're sabotaging their own ship. Another blast erupted, this one closer. Heat surged through the vents as fire burst from an overhead pipe. They barely managed to throw themselves out of the way. "They're trying to take us down with them," Lyra said, breathing hard. Alpha's jaw tightened. "Then we don't have much time." They turned a corner and came face to face with a sealed airlock. Through the reinforced window, the faint glow of the planet's surface shimmered in the distance. Their way out. Lyra reached for the control panel, but it was dead. They locked it down. Alpha didn't hesitate. He pressed both palms against the metal, focusing. Energy crackled through his fingers, surging into the locking mechanisms. Sparks erupted as the structure groaned under the force. Behind them, the sound of boots grew louder. The Trions were coming. Lyra drew her blade. "I'll hold them off." "No," Alpha said. "We go together." The lock gave way with a sharp hiss. The door slid open, revealing the abyss beyond. Their ship was nowhere in sight. Lyra's breath caught. They forced it away. Alpha turned back as the first Trion soldiers rounded the corner, weapons raised. There was no time to think. No time to plan. Only one way out. Alpha grabbed Lyra's hand. "We jump." And with that, they leapt into the void. The tension in the Wax Command Center was suffocating. Screens flickered with streams of tactical data, and the air was heavy with the anticipation of what was to come. Lyra stood beside Alpha, her fingers tightening into fists. The Trions had responded to their peace proposal, agreeing to a summit. But something felt off. "They're stalling," Lyra said, her voice firm. "We both know they have no intention of peace. This is a setup." Alpha's expression was unreadable. "If there is even a small chance to end this war without more bloodshed, we must take it." General Kales, the Wax military strategist, stepped forward. "With all due respect, Alpha, this reeks of deception. The Trions have never negotiated before, why would they start now?" Alpha turned to him, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Because they know we are becoming stronger. If they seek to deceive us, we will be ready. But we must show them that we are willing to talk before we are forced to fight." Lyra exhaled, her frustration evident. "Then we go in prepared. If they betray us, they will regret it." The location for the summit was set, neutral ground on a barren moon between Wax and the Trion homeworld. Alpha, Lyra, and a small diplomatic team boarded the sleek envoy ship, its hull shimmering with defensive energy fields. Behind them, a hidden fleet of wax warships remained cloaked in the darkness of space, ready to strike if needed. As they descended toward the meeting site, an eerie silence filled the air. The Trion delegation was already waiting, tall, armored figures with cold, unblinking eyes. At their center stood General Kralon, his imposing form radiating power and menace. "We welcome you," Kralon said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Let us speak of peace." Lyra felt a chill creep down her spine. This was wrong. The Trions were never this accommodating. Something was coming, something terrible. And they had just walked into the trap. The moment of truth had arrived. The Wax delegation stood before the towering Trion warlords in the grand chamber of the Trion stronghold. The walls pulsed with dark energy, an ominous reminder of the power the Trions wielded. Alpha and Lyra stood at the forefront, their expressions unreadable, while the Wax warriors kept their hands close to their energy weapons, ready for the slightest betrayal. General Kralon's voice echoed through the chamber. "A ceasefire. A compromise. How intriguing." His sharp gaze pierced through Alpha, studying his every move. "We do not seek endless bloodshed," Alpha said. His tone was calm but firm. "We wish for coexistence. Our people are not conquerors. We only seek to live in peace." Kralon sneered. "Peace is an illusion of the weak. Your kind should have surrendered when you had the chance." Lyra clenched her fists, sensing the tension rise. She had spent years trying to understand war, trying to adapt to its brutality. But diplomacy, this was a different kind of battlefield, one she wasn't sure she could trust. "We propose a neutral zone," she interjected. "A sector where neither Wax nor Trion forces will trespass. We will withdraw from certain territories, and in return, you will cease all hostilities." Kralon's smirk widened. "How generous. And tell me, what makes you think I would accept such a pitiful offer?" Alpha remained steady. "Because even you must see that war with us is not as simple as you once believed. You assumed we were weak. But we have fought back. We have adapted. And we will not fall easily." For the first time, the Trion leader hesitated. His forces had suffered more losses than expected. The Wax, though outmatched in sheer strength, had proven themselves to be far more resilient than he had predicted. But Kralon was not a creature of mercy, he was a tactician. And his mind was already crafting a different path forward. A sudden sound broke the tension, a distant explosion. Alpha's eyes narrowed. Lyra turned her head slightly, listening through her comms. Then came the transmission. "Alpha. It's an ambush." "The Trions," the message cut out in static. Alpha's gaze shot to Kralon, who now wore a grin of pure malice. "You truly thought we would honor such an insult of an agreement?" Kralon laughed, stepping back as armed Trion warriors poured into the chamber. "You are fools to believe in peace." The Wax warriors drew their weapons in an instant. Energy blades ignited, shimmering in defiance against the dark armor of their foes. Lyra's heart pounded. The betrayal was expected, yet it still stung. But there was no time for regret. "Alpha, we have to move, now." The first shots were fired. Explosions rocked the chamber as the Wax warriors leaped into action. Alpha dodged a blast of crimson energy, countering with a surge of his own power. The air crackled with energy as battle erupted. Lyra fought alongside him, her precision unmatched. She weaved between Trion warriors, striking with deadly efficiency. But they were outnumbered, and their forces outside were already under attack. Alpha's mind raced. This wasn't just an attack, it was an extermination attempt. The Trions had never intended to negotiate. They had lured them here to wipe them out in one swift strike. They had to escape. Through the chaos, Alpha's eyes locked with Lyra's. He could see the same determination in her that burned within him. There was no turning back now. Fall back. Alpha commanded. The Wax warriors regrouped, forming a defensive line as they pushed toward the exit. The corridor ahead was blocked by Trion forces, but retreat was not an option. They had walked into a trap, but they would not die here. Not today. The halls of the Trion stronghold echoed with the clash of energy blasts and the sharp hum of wax blades slicing through the air. Alpha led the charge through the collapsing corridors, his every step calculated, his every strike precise. The plan for peace had been nothing more than a carefully set trap, and now survival was their only priority. Lyra stayed close, her focus razor-sharp as she cut down a Trion soldier who lunged at her. The betrayal burned deep, but she forced the emotion aside. There was no time for anger, only action. Alpha, the outer hangars. There must be a way out. A pulse of energy surged through the corridor, forcing the Wax warriors to brace themselves. Kraylan's voice boomed from the stronghold's communication systems. You will not leave this place alive. Alpha ignored him, pushing forward as another group of Trion soldiers blocked their escape route. He raised his hand, channeling his energy into a shockwave that sent them crashing against the metal walls. The air crackled with raw power, power that had once been a symbol of peace, now a weapon of necessity. Lyra scanned their surroundings as they moved. They were close to the outer hangars, but the Trions were prepared. Reinforcements swarmed in from multiple entry points, cutting off paths one by one. The stronghold itself was shifting, bulkheads sealing, barriers rising. It was a death trap, designed to crush them. We're running out of time, she warned. Alpha knew she was right. If they didn't reach the hangars now, there would be no escape. His mind worked rapidly through possibilities. Then he saw it, an auxiliary control panel near the far wall. Lyra, cover me, he ordered. She didn't hesitate. As Alpha rushed toward the panel, she turned, raising her hands. A sphere of luminous energy erupted from her fingertips, expanding outward in a force field that absorbed the incoming blasts from the Trion forces. The strain was immense, but she held firm. Alpha reached the panel, overriding the system with a precise burst of energy. The metal doors leading to the hangars groaned before sliding open just enough to squeeze through. This way. The Wax warriors moved fast, pushing into the hangar. Lyra followed last, releasing the energy barrier just as a final blast sent shockwaves through the corridor behind her. She stumbled slightly, but Alpha caught her arm, steadying her. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Amid the chaos, the unspoken understanding between them remained. A second longer, and they might have allowed themselves that moment. But war didn't wait. Inside the hangar, rows of Trion ships stood in formation, sleek and battle-ready. Alpha surveyed the area. We take one of their own ships. Lyra's lips curled into a smirk. Now that's a plan. As the Trion alarms blared, the Wax warriors sprinted toward the nearest transport, the battle far from over. The Trion hangar was a battlefield of its own. The moment Alpha and the Wax warriors rushed inside, automated turrets sprang to life, locking onto them with lethal precision. Streams of plasma fire rained down, forcing them to dive for cover behind the nearest cargo containers. The air smelled of scorched metal, the heat of the blast searing through the cold, sterile atmosphere of the stronghold. We don't have time for this, Lyra said, glancing at the incoming squads of Trion soldiers pouring in from the opposite end. Alpha's mind raced. There was no way they could fight through all of them, not without losing too many in the process. They needed a ship, now. He spotted a sleek Trion assault craft docked near the far end of the hangar, its engines still warm from recent use. If they could get to it, they had a chance. There. That's our way out, Alpha said, motioning toward the vessel. One of the Wax warriors, Joran, scanned the ship. Trion security systems will be locked. We'll need time to override it. Then we'll make the time, Alpha replied. Lyra and a few others laid down cover fire, their energy blasts colliding with Trion armor, while Alpha and Joran sprinted toward the ship. More Trion soldiers were closing in, their movements precise, relentless. The enemy was adapting, learning from their previous encounters. A massive explosion rocked the hangar as a missile detonated against the ceiling, sending debris raining down. Alpha barely managed to roll aside as a flaming support beam crashed to the floor where he had stood moments ago. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos. Alpha, move. He didn't need to be told twice. With a final burst of speed, he reached the ship's side, slamming his palm against the access panel. His energy flared as he forced his way into the Trion system, bypassing layers of encrypted security. The ship resisted, its failsafes attempting to purge the override, but Alpha's control was absolute. With a sharp pulse of energy, the doors hissed open. Get inside, he shouted. The Wax warriors didn't hesitate, dashing toward the open hatch as the Trions pushed harder, closing the distance. Lyra was the last to reach the ramp, covering the retreat with precision strikes. As she reached the threshold, a Trion soldier lunged from the shadows, blade aimed directly at her. Alpha saw it a fraction of a second too late. Lyra twisted, barely dodging the first strike, but the second sliced across her side. She staggered, pain flashing across her face. Before the Trion could land another blow, Alpha's energy surged. He struck with brutal efficiency, sending the enemy flying backward. He grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her inside. You're not dying here. She clenched her jaw, nodding despite the pain. Then get us out of here. Joran was already at the controls, bringing the ship's engines online. The hangar doors were sealing, massive blast shields closing in to trap them. Alpha took the co-pilot's seat, fingers flying over the unfamiliar controls. With a final surge of energy, he forced the ship's systems to obey. The engines roared to life. Hold on, he warned. The ship launched forward, slipping through the narrowing gap just as the doors slammed shut behind them. Plasma fire chased them into the void, but they were already gone. Inside the cockpit, Alpha turned to Lyra. Her hand was pressed against her side, blood staining her uniform. You're hurt, he said. She forced a smirk despite the pain. Not the first time. Alpha held her gaze for a long moment. The war wasn't over, but right now, she was here. That was enough. For now. The stolen Trion assault craft cut through the void at blistering speed, its engines burning hot as it weaved through the asteroid field surrounding the enemy's command station. Alpha remained locked onto the controls, forcing the ship to respond to his will despite the encrypted security trying to reclaim control. Every system fought against him, but he was relentless. We've got incoming, Joran reported from the co-pilot seat. Multiple Trion fighters closing in, fast. On the rear screens, a swarm of sleek, needle-like Trion interceptors were in pursuit, their engines glowing with an eerie blue light. They were built for speed and precision, and they were gaining. Lyra, still clutching her injured side, strapped herself into the nearest seat. We can't outrun them forever. We need a way to shake them. Alpha's mind worked through the possibilities. Fighting back wasn't an option, not with a stolen ship that barely obeyed them. Their weapons systems were still locked out. Defensive maneuvers were their only chance. He pulled the ship into a sudden, stomach-turning dive, weaving through the jagged maze of asteroids. The Trion pilots followed with unnatural precision, narrowly avoiding the massive rock formations that threatened to crush them. Their laser fire streaked through the darkness, forcing Alpha to push the ship even harder. Shields are weakening, Joran warned. One direct hit, and we're done. Alpha gritted his teeth. He needed something, anything, to tip the odds in their favor. Then he saw it. A massive asteroid, cracked open like a wound, revealing an unstable energy core glowing from within. A remnant of some ancient cosmic event, its energy pulsed erratically, distorting space around it. That thing's putting off massive radiation, Lyra noted, eyes widening. If we fly through it, the Trions won't dare follow, Alpha finished. Joran hesitated. And if we don't make it? Then we die fast instead of being picked apart by those fighters. Alpha didn't wait for agreement. He forced the ship forward, straight toward the anomaly. The Trion pilots hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. As the stolen craft dove into the glowing rift, radiation alarms blared, and the ship shook violently. The hull creaked under the strain, warning systems screaming as gravitational forces pulled them in different directions. Energy rippled through the cockpit like static electricity. "Hold it together," Alpha commanded, tightening his grip on the controls. His energy flared, synchronizing with the ship's systems, forcing stability where there was none. Behind them, two of the pursuing Trion ships attempted to follow. The moment they breached the energy field, they were consumed. Their hulls twisted and shattered as the unstable gravitational forces crushed them into debris. The remaining fighters pulled back. "We made it," Joran exhaled. "I can't believe that worked." The ship burst free from the anomaly's grasp, emerging on the other side of the asteroid field. The Trions were nowhere in sight. Lyra let out a shaky breath. That was insane. Alpha glanced at her. "We're alive. For now," she said, voice softer. "But this isn't over. They'll come back even stronger." Alpha knew she was right. They had escaped, but the war was far from finished. And deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. "Understood. I'll make part 9 longer and more detailed, without breaking it into smaller sections. Let's get straight into it and keep the intensity high." The message from the Trion War Council had been brief. Cold. Almost mechanical in its delivery. "We have considered your request for peace," General Kraylon had said, his reptilian features unreadable. "Perhaps there is a way to avoid further unnecessary destruction." Alpha had listened in silence, his expression betraying nothing. The Trions had never entertained peace before. Their entire existence revolved around domination, the extermination of threats before they could rise. The idea that they would now, after so many battles, after so much blood, suddenly consider negotiation. It didn't feel right. But the war had taken its toll. On both sides. The WACs had suffered heavy losses in the last engagement. Cities had been reduced to glowing scars of molten crystal, their defenses pushed to the brink. They had retaliated, striking deep into Trion territory, forcing them to retreat. Now, for the first time, the Trions were proposing peace. Or at least, that's what they wanted the WACs to believe. Lyra stood beside Alpha in the dimly lit war chamber, watching the flickering remains of the holographic transmission. Her jaw was set, her golden eyes cold with suspicion. "This is a trap," she said, arms crossed. "You know that." Joran, standing to Alpha's left, exhaled sharply. "Of course it's a trap. But what choice do we have? We can't keep fighting like this. If there's even a chance." "There isn't," Lyra snapped. "They're stalling. Or worse, setting us up for something bigger." Alpha remained still, hands resting on the control panel. He understood Lyra's anger. He shared it. The WACs had been fighting for their very survival, forced into a war they never wanted. And now, when they had finally started turning the tide, the enemy was offering an alternative. It was too convenient. Too sudden. And yet. "They're giving us a meeting place," Alpha said at last. "A neutral station in the dead expanse. They say they want to talk." Lyra shook her head. "Then why not meet here? Why drag us to the middle of nowhere? I don't trust it." Neither did Alpha. But war wasn't just about battle. It was about decisions. Calculated risks. If we refuse, we lose the moral ground, he said. If we accept and it's a trap, we at least expose their deception. And if it's not a trap? Joran asked. Lyra scoffed. Then I'll personally apologize to the Trions before they stab us in the back. The decision had to be made. Alpha turned to the console and sent his reply. We'll meet them, he said. But we won't come unprepared. The Wax fleet moved cautiously through the void, engines humming as they approached the meeting point. The dead expanse was a graveyard of forgotten battles, its space littered with derelict warships, silent wrecks drifting aimlessly. It was a place of ghosts. A fitting stage for diplomacy, or betrayal. Alpha stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, Lyra beside him. She had refused to stay behind. The Trion ships were already there, waiting. Silent. Dark. Their angular forms barely visible against the void. A single transmission came through. Docking procedures initiated, Kralon's voice announced. Prepare to board. Inside the airlock chamber, Alpha, Lyra, and Joran stood in rigid formation as the Trion delegation arrived. Kralon himself stepped forward, flanked by his elite guards. His eyes glowed faintly under the sterile light. We are here, Kralon said, his tone unreadable. Now, let us talk. Lyra didn't move. Didn't breathe. Something was wrong. Then the alarms blared. The Wax fleet shuddered as hidden Trion warships decloaked from the darkness. Blinding bursts of plasma fire erupted from all sides, ripping into unshielded hulls, tearing through formations before anyone could react. Explosions flared across the battlefield. Lyra spun around, her breath sharp. They set us up. Alpha's mind worked in overdrive. The Trions had never intended peace. This was an execution. A slaughter. Kralon smirked. You Wax truly are naive. The attack had begun. The war was far from over. The station trembled as explosions erupted outside, shaking the very foundations of the so-called peace summit. Sirens wailed, red emergency lights flashing against the steel walls. Alpha's muscles tensed as he locked eyes with Kralon, whose smirk hadn't faded. The betrayal had been inevitable. But knowing that didn't make it any less infuriating. Lyra's fingers twitched near the energy blade at her waist, her body wound like a spring ready to snap. Joran was already moving, his stance shifting defensively as the Trion guards reached for their weapons. Alpha reacted first. A pulse of energy rippled from his palm, a controlled burst that sent the nearest Trion soldier crashing into the wall. The room erupted into chaos. Lyra moved like lightning, her blade igniting in a burst of shimmering blue. She dodged a strike from a Trion warrior and countered with a precise slash that sent sparks flying. Joran fired his energy pistol, his shots landing true, forcing the enemy back. But Kralon didn't flinch. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his towering form exuding menace. He had expected this. Prepared for it. This war ends today, Kralon growled. With your extinction. Alpha clenched his fists. His mind reached out, bending the energy around him, channeling it into a focus strike. But before he could unleash it, the walls behind them exploded inward. A group of Wax soldiers stormed in, led by General Kales. His armor was scorched, his face set in grim determination. We're under heavy fire. Kales shouted over the deafening alarms. The fleet is taking damage, Trion reinforcements are everywhere. We need to move, now. Alpha didn't hesitate. He turned to Lyra and Joran. Get to the ships. Lyra hesitated, her gaze flicking between him and Kralon. She wanted to stay. Wanted to fight. But she knew what was at stake. With a tight nod, she backed toward the exit, covering Joran as he fired suppressive shots. The Wax forces laid down covering fire, forcing the Trions to retreat momentarily. Kralon let them go. He only had eyes for Alpha now. This war will not end with your survival, Kralon said, his voice like a promise of death. You were never meant to exist, Alpha. Your kind, this experiment, it ends now. Alpha's expression was unreadable. He could feel the battle raging beyond these walls. Wax ships burning. Soldiers fighting for their lives. Lyra escaping, even as she fought the urge to turn back. He had a choice to make. Stay and fight Kralon here, or retreat and save his people. The ceiling shuddered as another explosion rocked the station. Time was slipping away. Alpha took a slow breath. Then, with a final look at Kralon, he turned and ran. The Trion general didn't pursue. Not yet. This wasn't over. Outside, the battlefield was a vision of destruction. Wax ships maneuvered desperately, outnumbered and overwhelmed. The Trions had planned this perfectly, an ambush disguised as peace. Alpha boarded his command ship just as Lyra pulled him in. We need to retreat, she said, her voice tight with urgency. There's too many of them. Alpha gave the order. The Wax fleet broke formation, pushing through enemy fire, escaping into the void. As the Trion fleet loomed behind them, victorious in their deception, one thing became clear. The war had reached a new, darker phase. And the Wax had just lost far more than a battle. They had lost hope.